All right, folks, we're going to get started with the UAC meeting roll call.
Melton present.
All present.
Foster present.
Eglash present.
Okay, oral communications. We have one member of the public who is asked to speak on a non-agendized item. That is Jeff, come on up.
Okay. Okay, at Council's retreat, February 1st, they decided not to have a Technology and the Connected City Committee. And that was the committee that last year was watching fiber to the premises. Although they only had 2 meetings, and at the retreat, Council kind of admitted they didn't do much last year, even though it was a priority. Anyway, this year, I think they haven't announced how Council is going to watch fiber to the premises. And it occurred to me that since UAC has a charter to watch the fiber utility, and since it's obvious to me that fiber to the premises is part of the fiber utility, I wonder if UAC could take seriously the possibility of putting it on the agenda and talking about it and making sure that something happens. And if Council doesn't like it, they can tell you what they're going to do instead. But the thing I don't want to have happen is nothing. Thanks.
Okay, approval of the minutes is next up. Any comments on the minutes from the last meeting? Sounds like it.
I move if we approve the minutes.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. Okay, agenda review and revisions. Anything? Nope. Okay, next up, report from commissioner meetings and events. Quiet. We're just racing through the agenda. Director of Utilities report.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess you're kind of acting Chair Foster. Valerie Fong, Utilities Director, I have a report for you. And we actually did have a request from one commissioner to make sure we covered the water supply situation, both as it might impact the water utility and as it might impact the electric utility. Thank you very much, Commissioner Hall. On January 17th, Governor Brown proclaimed a state of emergency, which called for 20% statewide cutbacks in water use and called upon local urban water suppliers to implement their local water shortage contingency plans immediately in order to avoid or forestall outright restrictions that could become necessary later in the drought season. On January 28th, the Santa Clara Valley Water District Board set a preliminary water reduction target equal to 10% of 2013 water use in Santa Clara County. And then on January 31st, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission asked all customers of the Hetch Hetchy Regional Water System to voluntarily curtail water consumption by 10%. As of January 31, the SFPUC's regional water system had a little more than 1 million acre-feet in storage, down from 1.2 million acre-feet a year ago on January 31, 2013. The precipitation for the water year to date, which is October 2013 through January 2014, is only 26.4% of the average to date. In addition, snow survey measurements indicate that the snowpack in the Tuolumne River Basin is only 9% of normal February 1 conditions. The recent precipitation has helped some, but more is needed. The SFPC may call for larger or mandatory water cutbacks by April 15, 2014. Meanwhile, the city has begun implementing its water shortage contingency plan that was adopted by council as part of the 2010 Urban Water Management Plan. The plan calls for the following actions as part of a Stage 1 effort to achieve 5 to 10% water use reductions. Ongoing information outreach and audit programs, which are focused on water-saving information and a media information campaign with the emphasis on reducing waste. Enforcement of permanent water use ordinances on an as-reported basis and mostly via reminder notices. Incentive-based demand-side management programs continued and augmented to provide the savings required. And we are not implementing, in accordance with the water shortage contingency plan, we are not implementing any drought rate structure since standard residential rate structure already encourages conservation by having a relatively small fixed charge and increasing block rates based on water consumption. By the way, on March 3rd, the City Council is tentatively scheduled to hold an informational study session on drought impacts and actions. On the electric utility front, with regard to water conditions, the ongoing drought, which comes on the heels of back-to-back drier than average years, is also beginning to take a toll on hydroelectric generation supplies. As of February 10, cumulative precipitation totals for the water year in northern and central California were approximately 40% of average, and reservoir levels in this region were approximately 50% of average for this time of year. Even if precipitation levels return to average going forward, our western base resource supply is expected to be 20% below long-term average levels this fiscal year, and Calaveras hydro supplies are projected to be 52% below long-term average levels. The cost of making up for the shortfall in energy supplies with market purchases is estimated to be $5.8 million for this fiscal year. In addition to the impact on hydro generation levels, the drought will also soon impact the city's, we call it CVPIA Restoration Fund. The CVPIA is the Central Valley Project Restoration Fund, and actually CVPIA stands for Central Valley Project Improvement Act, Restoration Fund costs. That was authorized in 1992 under the Act. This fund provides funding from project beneficiaries, who are power and water customers, for habit restoration, improvement and acquisition, and other fish and wildlife restoration activities related to the Central Valley Project. We get our Western Power from there. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation recently sent out a letter to Western Preference Power customers, including Palo Alto, announcing a significant increase in these customers' restoration fund obligations for the April through September 2014 period. The Bureau regularly implements a mid-year adjustment to restoration fund charges, and this year, the impact is a significant cost increase to Palo Alto and other power customers due to the ongoing drought. The city's costs will increase by $260,000 per month, and over that 6-month period, April through September, it'll be $1.6 million. And then a few other updates. So that's by the way, what did East Bay Mud's board vote?
They voted to request customers. The question was what East Bay Mud, since I work for East Bay Mud, the board voted yesterday to request customers to voluntarily conserve 10%.
Thank you. Communications update. We have a Keep Calm and Save Water campaign. This has been our theme for the past month, as we're encouraging residents and businesses to take water-saving actions that make sense regardless of drought conditions. We are using social media, traditional ads, utilities bill inserts and messages, email blasts, and media alerts to raise public awareness about the water supply situation and what actions they can take. The hub for public information on any water-related issue, program, or service, you can find it on the city's website at www.cityofpaloalto.org/water. Read Your Own Meter program. We've made this, the Read Your Own Meter program, alternative easier by including the option for customers submitting photos, we allow photos of the meters with the reads to be submitted. We're working in conjunction with police to help customers who, for safety reasons, want to keep their yard gates locked at all times. Our meter readers need access to the meter. If the meter's behind a lock gate, they need to leave it open for some period of the day while the meter reader might come by. Otherwise, customers have the option to read their own meters, keep their gates locked, and we will come by once a year to double-check that meter read. We do have additional details on our website again. And then expanded and updated website for kids. We've beefed up our page of fun facts, videos, and giveaways promoting safety and conservation for kids. Once again, that can be reached at the website at www.cityofpaloalto.org/UTLFunZone. And then, I believe last month, we had a question from Commissioner Melton asking for some updates on the My Utilities account and the number of users we've got. And so we're going to provide some updates here. The My Utilities account, or MUA, enrollment level is about 45% of utilities account holders, which means about 14,000 accounts. 85% of those accounts are residential accounts, and then 15% are commercial accounts. The MUA enrollment increased by 17%, about 2,000 new accounts in the past 12 months. Approximately 5,200 unique accounts log in each month. And out of the 14,000 accounts that are currently registered, more than 36% pay their invoices online. That's about 5,000 accounts do online payments. And then I believe we also had some interest in the anaerobic digester project update. I'll give you a quick update, although Vice Chair Foster may have additional information as he was there on Monday night. On Monday night, the City Council had a study session on the vendor responses to our Public Works Department's energy/compost facility request for proposals. The RFP elicited 2 responsive proposals dealing with an energy compost facility. Staff's preliminary conclusions are that the best technology for biosolids and food scraps is thermal hydrolysis with wet anaerobic digestion, and the best solution for yard waste is composting. While project costs are not fully evaluated at this time, the preliminary recommendations are A, to not select either of the proposals from the RFP, and B, to focus on the long-term plan to replace the incinerator at the sewage treatment plant with an anaerobic digester for the biosolids, and until the incinerator can be replaced, the biosolids would be hauled off-site. Public Works expects to make a final recommendation to the council in April, and then here's where you all come in. The economics of the anaerobic digester is sensitive to the electric price that utilities would pay for the renewable energy that would be generated. Utilities has indicated its interest to purchase power from such a facility under a power purchase agreement from the project at the avoided cost of renewable power. We intend to return to this commission with a proposal to expand the Palo Alto Clean program to include local renewable energy facilities, including not just solar, but other local renewable energy options, including this project. And then the last update, there was a presentation at the Oshman JCC preschool. On February 6th, we provided over 150 preschoolers, Chair Cook is chuckling over this one. We provided over 150 preschoolers with an interactive lesson on how solar panels convert sunlight to energy. We were requested to make this presentation as a precursor to the March 18th ribbon-cutting event for the JCC's new solar PV system, which is the 3rd largest in Palo Alto after Hewlett-Packard's, and that concludes my report.
First of all, I apologize for being late. As we have no unfinished business, we'll go on to new business item number 1.
Thank you very much. So the first item is a recommendation from staff that the commission recommend that the City Council approve the city's local solar plan. We have Senior Resource Planner Monica Padilla here. She's been working on this with a team of other staff members. We also have our engineering, marketing engineer, Lindsay Joy, who is our program manager for our PV programs.
As soon as it gets loaded. Take them to the one. Okay, so I have a very, oh, that's loud. I have a very quick presentation tonight. So as Val mentioned, oh. Okay, so staff's request tonight is to recommend approval of a local solar plan. which is provided to you in the staff reports attachment A. The local solar plan is basically a roadmap to provide us some guidance over the next 2 years on how to pursue a higher penetration in solar than we have right now. It essentially sets a goal of about of 4% of the city's energy needs in 2023. So that's going from 0.7% of our load right now to 4% in 2023, which is equivalent to about 23 megawatts in 2023, which we believe is an ambitious goal, and we think we can get there. And the plan also, while it provides a whole lot of roadmap and a whole lot of guidance and a whole lot of initiatives, it really is focused on developing some new programs to augment what we currently do in the utilities to promote solar, including developing a community solar donation program, developing a community share program, and developing a solar group discount program. These are all efforts that need resources in order to develop, so we've laid out a timeline on how we're going to do this. Next one. Sorry. So the need for the local solar plan are many, but first and foremost is that our community wants it. We've heard from our community that they want different types of solar programs for those that have good solar access, for those who don't have good solar access. We've heard that they want to try to increase solar at sites where they can basically do as a donation, such as school sites. So we took all those needs and we tried to see how we can meet those needs. This, coupled with the national trend of the cost of solar going down quite significantly, makes it kind of a prime time to pounce on these opportunities to try to increase that penetration. Along with that trend, though, and this huge demand, is that our customers, along with everybody else in the nation and the state, are facing many, many, many choices. There's lots of things. I mean, you can lease it, you can buy it, well, you all know. And so that makes the decision on what to do a little bit more complex, so we want to help direct our customers to making good choices. Also, in 2014, our state-mandated program, which is the basis for our PV partner rebate program, all of the funds in that program will have been committed. So that rebate will essentially, or that incentive will go away. And the incentives that we provide under the net energy metering cap, which is also a state-mandated program, will also go away at the end of 2017, as we will have met the cap. So with those incentives, along with the possibility that the tax credits that are offered by the state and national will go away, it sets up a stage for us trying to figure out how we can encourage PV installations beyond those incentives. So the plan basically sets, again, a roadmap in it, and it puts the city in a role of basically facilitating the installation of cost-effective and safe penetration. So the next slide shows how Palo Alto is doing right now in terms of ranking for solar installations to date. We are in the top 10 for the U.S. in terms of systems installed per all of our customers. And one thing I want to note is that the first 1, 2, 3, 4 utilities are all utilities in Hawaii that have really, really, really high electric rates. And as you know, Palo Alto has really low electric rates. So just to be amongst those other utilities puts us in we do really well, basically. But we want to do better.
I recommend we refer to ourselves as number 3 in the continental United States.
Okay.
Or number 2 in California.
We're number 1 in the peninsula. We're number 1 in. You know, Roseville's above it. Roseville has really high electric rates. So, well, higher than us. So just to kind of outline how we got to this potential. Again, PV partners, we expect that by the end of 2014, we will have reached 8.6 megawatts of capacity, or about 1.5% of the city's energy needs. Then the clean energy program, we expect to get about 3 megawatts. Whether it comes in 2014 or 2015 or some other point, not sure, but that's just basically That's based on the cap that council recently approved. And then we believe we'll get an additional PV installations just naturally from what we've seen national trends, and because the prices have been coming down and customers just want it, that another 8 megawatts of PV will come online. And then to reach our goal, we'll need another 3.4 megawatts. So you can see there that our goal is 23 megawatts, and that represents about 23% of what we identified as the maximum technical potential. And that's a number that we came up with looking at basically a map of Palo Alto and solar that was PV systems installed already and where there was good solar access. So we did some kind of really high-level analysis, but one of the tasks or initiatives that are identified in the plan is to further refine that technical and achievable potential numbers. So how are we going to get there? So again, while the focus is to develop these programs over the next 2 years, we did lay out 7 basic strategies, and I can quickly go over them, but I won't spend a whole lot of time. But number 1 is to reduce the internal barriers, or what we call soft costs, to installing PV in Palo Alto. There's information that supports that installing PV in Palo Alto isn't more expensive than in other parts of the Bay Area or the state or the nation for that matter. So we're going to do what we can to try to reduce some of those costs where we can. Also, we will encourage the development of proper policies and incentives to promote solar in Palo Alto. Again, assess the technical and market potential so that we know where that potential is and where does it make sense for us to pursue it. Number 4, develop programs for customers with good solar access. So while PV Partners program is in place right now, we'll continue to promote that, but we also hope to develop like a group discount program for those customers who have good solar access to kind of bring down the price there. And we also, again, want to encourage the development for programs for customers without good solar access. So we've heard from our community that they're interested in a community solar solar investment or share program where they install it someplace else, but they reap the benefits of the installation. So we'll look at those programs. Number 6, and this is already kind of in the works through another department, but promote solar to the fullest extent possible on city facilities. And so we fully support that. And then last, educate through innovation and demonstration. So we intend to tie this into the city's innovation program and see where we can do some demo projects. So in terms of timeline for the programs that we were talking about, the community donation program is the one that kind of rose to top on our priority. We definitely have heard from some of the schools and some other non-for-profit organizations that this is something they're very interested in. We hope to work on designing and fleshing out the details of that program in the next couple of months, actually, or really relatively soon, and then coming back to the UAC Finance Committee and Council for approval and hopefully launching that in October 2014. And then we'll follow that one with the Community Share Investment Program with the target to get that launched by July 2015. And then last, a group discount program that we hope to launch in January 2016. Now, this is just a tentative timeline, and certainly if resources permit, we can work on some of these programs simultaneously and bring them to you sooner rather than later, but this is what we set out so far. So what are our next steps for the plan in terms of approval? We're here tonight for your feedback, and then we will go to the Finance Committee with the plan and any modifications as necessary in March, and then City Council in April, and then we hope to start to do the work to implement it. So that's all I have, if you have any feedback.
Great. Thanks very much for the presentation.
If you have any technical questions, Lindsay's here to answer them, by the way.
I would like to take public comment at this time, and we have one card, but if anyone else would like to speak, go ahead and bring up a card. But Bruce Hodge, come on up. Cards, yeah, or just over there.
Good evening, commissioners and staff, and I'm Bruce Hodge from Carbon Free Palo Alto. I'd like to commend the CPAO staff for a report that is well-structured and cogent. I'm generally supportive of the proposed programs, but would like to see more analysis of the big picture and an accelerated timeline for the community solar program. In Palo Alto, any increase in local solar doesn't necessarily result in emissions reductions. However, we do have a projected growth in our electricity supply, and local solar can perhaps contribute all or some part of the additional supply required. The electricity landscape is poised to change dramatically. What will the demand growth be if Palo Alto has an EV in every household by 2023? Or if half of all households and businesses have heat pump water heaters by 2023? Or if all lighting was replaced by LED technology by 2023? We know there are limits to local solar. The technical potential, as mentioned, is estimated to be 100 megawatts. What is the likely actual potential? In my view, more analysis would surface a goal that harmonizes with the larger climate action plan goals rather than picking 4% in 10 years because it seems feasible. Even though it's hard to develop estimates for the impacts of each proposed program, an idea of the costs and potential outcome would be tremendously helpful. The Community Solar Program, if implemented using the model developed by the Clean Energy Collective, or CEC, has the largest potential impact of any of the proposed programs and should be fast-tracked and implemented first ahead of the other proposed programs. Not only can this program significantly impact the local solar installed base, it has the potential to help jumpstart the community solar model statewide at a large scale. Adoption of this program would be a first for the state and again put Palo Alto into the spotlight for being an innovative force. Unlike any of the other programs, community solar would feature a third-party administrator that would be actively pursuing large-scale local solar and seeking investors. This alone is a significant advantage. The CEC model enjoys many advantages, too many to list here, but including all projects are local DG, local investors own the project and revenues flow directly to them and benefit the community directly. The implementation costs to the utility are trivial, and the risk and downside potential to the utility is minimal. To proceed, CPAU needs to issue an RFP and enable billing system modifications, placing the burden for that on the third party. There's no need to invent another model. It exists already and is robust. In my view, the timeline should be accelerated so that any third party can start a project implementation by January 1st, 2015. The Community Solar Donation Program opens the doors to a series of headaches associated with the utility actually deploying solar projects and managing them. However, it would make much more sense if the funds are periodically withdrawn from the donation fund and invested along with other local investors in a community solar project. The voting process could also be used to designate the owners of the solar panel assets, i.e. the school district or nonprofits, who would then receive a steady stream of revenues from the project. Adding heat pump-based water heaters to the group discount program would result in substantive GHG reductions. Models exist already for effective programs that feature multiple technologies. No objections to PV at city-owned utilities, although the potential is relatively small. Again, another obvious candidate to be owned by local investors via a community solar project with lease revenues flowing back to the city. In summary, the community solar program should be fast-tracked and implemented first because it has the highest potential impact as well as synergistic boosts to other local solar programs. Community solar has a lot of potential to scale to hundreds of megawatts of installed local solar across the state. Palo Alto has an opportunity to be the first to host a successful project in California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate your active involvement in this and other things. We have one more card. It's Brett Anderson. Come on up.
So I'm in town, and I have solar on my roof, and I'm very pleased with the way Palo Alto is pushing that kind of technology for the future. I think that the best option and the one that represents a real innovation in the business model for solar is the community solar option. And the reason I say that is because right now, if you don't have a roof that's good for solar, you can't own solar and get the energy from it. So it really is a breakthrough and opens up a new market that can be driven by, pure business interest as well as the belief in the community coming together, investors and consumers of the energy. And I guess the only additional point I wanted to make is that the other options there are also something that can be done today with existing rules and existing systems. So really by just doing some modifications to the utility systems, we're opening up essentially a whole new market and an opportunity for Palo Alto to take the lead, in fact, I think, in the solar segment. That's it.
Okay, ready to go into commissioners' comments and questions. Commissioner English?
Sure.
I want to commend staff. I'm utterly delighted with the recommendation and the plan that you've put forward. I think this is one of the most exciting things that we've done and that we will be doing. And I think the plan that you've proposed has all the right aspects and components, and you've articulated all the right things. So as I say, I commend you, and I'm utterly delighted. I have just a couple of questions and comments. I think some people might wonder, given that we're already carbon neutral, why we should be encouraging more solar. And if we go to the attachment, the actual plan that's being put forward, it says that the goal is to increase the penetration of local solar installations, but nowhere does it explain why that's an important goal. And I think for the sake of completeness and the benefit of any residents who, for whom it's not obvious, you might want to add a sentence or two of what you think the reasons are. I'm quite open to whatever you might think the right reasons are. It could be that it becomes a good contribution to our RPS, given that some of the PPAs in the RPS are going to sunset at some point. It could be that you want to talk about the benefits of renewable energy here in the city as opposed to buying it off of the grid. There may be other reasons you want to point out. I don't know if you want to comment on the reasons why now, or you just like me to move on to my next comment. Anybody? Yes? No? Yes?
I could try. Well, I think the benefits are, I guess, not stated, somewhat obvious, that they reduce the need to buy additional RPS resources. They provide a local, sustainable resource that has the council and the community have identified as having some strategic value to the city. We could certainly state them and include them in the report, though. Did you want to add anything?
My next question, you note that the PV Partners program is expected to run out of funds at the end of 2014. Can we extend that program?
I'll let Jane answer.
Jane Ratchey, Assistant Director of Utilities. Well, I mean, that would be a decision to expand it. The program is a subsidy program, and so it's being subsidized by non-participants. But it is a mandated program, and at the end of it, if we wanted to continue the subsidy, then that's a decision council could make. But this plan that we're proposing does not propose any new subsidies beyond the ones that are mandated, which are the rebates from the PV Partners program and the net energy metering cap. And so we're looking at what can we do now. I think the PV Partners program in general accomplished the goal statewide to really reduce the cost of solar, that in RPS goals in the state. And that goal has largely been accomplished. And so the market has developed, the prices are cheaper, it is maybe at parity to some degree, and so there's less of a need, but that, again, would be a council decision.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us that that program involves subsidies, and I'll have a comment of my own on subsidies in a minute. There is at least one point in the memo where you mentioned solar water heating as well as photovoltaic. I think that's where you talk about solar group discount programs. In fact, is the intent that that's the only place where solar hot water heating would be part of this program, or do you imagine that the entirety of the program, that other parts of the program might be hot water as well as photovoltaic?
I think the only time that we mention the solar hot water heating program is in the group discount program. Right now we have, while not a mandate, it's a target set by the state to offer rebates for solar hot water heaters. And Lindsay, you administer that program?
We use a third party to administer the program.
But basically, we find that they're not very cost effective. And so, and there's probably other technologies that are better than solar hot water heating. But in order to bring the price down as much as possible, we'll include it in our evaluation in the group discount program.
It's not entirely clear to me how solar hot water works in a community solar program. The advantage, of course, of photovoltaic is you just put it on the grid, and it allows you to do all kinds of virtual things, as you described so nicely in the memo. We don't have a hot water grid that allows us to just put hot water energy in and out of the grid. So I'll leave that to staff. So I guess I did want to come back to this subsidy and fairness question for a moment. Renewable energy is clearly a great thing, and we're all really concerned about sustainability and decreasing carbon emissions. And net metering, of course, has done a lot to make residential and commercial solar more attractive. I am concerned, though, that with our current rate structure, net metering means that people that install lots of solar are paying very low electric bills, and they're really not paying their fair share of maintaining the infrastructure and the spinning reserves that they depend on. And in fact, the people who aren't installing solar are effectively bearing an unfair share of the burden of maintaining all of that electric grid infrastructure. It's true that there's social benefits of any solar. Anytime we can be putting less carbon in the atmosphere, everyone benefits. That's true. But I am worried that to some degree, the people who aren't installing solar are providing economic benefits to the people who are. My guess is that at some point net metering is going to be eliminated for everyone in California. My guess is that at some point the state, the nation may even need to move to an electric rate structure where there's a connection cost that's a much larger fraction of the bill, and the price per kilowatt hour, the variable cost is lower as a way of representing the burden of maintaining the infrastructure of the electric grid and the spinning reserves. We're clearly not there yet. It's clearly still a great thing to be encouraging distributed generation of solar. I love what you've put forward. But I guess I do wonder to what degree staff in developing this and in thinking about the next 5 or 10 years has contemplated the sort of scenario I'm describing, that there may be a future when net metering goes away, and there may even be a future where the rate structure is drastically different than it is now, where everyone's paying a fairly large connection charge. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, or you'd rather not without reflecting on it.
Well, there is a limit in the state law, and it's 5% of our peak load. And I think if you look at somewhere in attachment B, is it? Yeah, and on page B4, in attachment B, that shows that about at the end of the PV Partners program, when those rebates and the capacity under that program run out, we will meet that target. And net energy metering then again will be a policy decision of whether we want to continue beyond what we have to according to the law. So it does have a limit. Yeah, and we do know that there is an issue with rate design. Electric is our only utility that does not have a fixed component. And we haven't changed electric rates since 2009. And we are planning to look at our electric rates and conduct an electric cost of service study. And we'll be coming back to the UAC before we conduct that study to get some policy input prior to the development of that cost of service study. And I would imagine that would be one key issue that would be addressed in a new rate design for electric. And so we are thinking about it and looking at it.
Thank you very much. I have no further comments or questions.
Commissioner Hall.
great report and great plan. I really appreciate the clarity with which you prepare these plans. So I'm about to suggest some things that which you should not construe as me not being in favor of the plan. I am. But I think that I'm going to go a little further than Mr. Hodge did in his comments, in one part of his comments, and just ask that we explain, perhaps as part of this plan or perhaps related to this plan, really where we're going in terms of the overall percentage long-term of distributed generation, local solar. And I realize this explicitly says we're pushing to 4%. But I'm also aware of, in line with Commissioner Eglash's comments, that there's this subsidy involved here too. And I think we're in the zone here, we're less than 1% going to 4%, that it's not a big worry yet as to the next point I'm going to make. But I think we need to consider the cost overall, or the economics of proceeding with this plan versus going with major facilities out in the grid in more more solar-intensive areas. For example, the ones that we've included in the RPS program. Financially, I think I suspect that those are better, even though there's a grid charge to bring the power to City Gate. These are maybe very desirable from the community, and therefore I support them. But at some point, I think there's a bright line in terms of our plan, and maybe it belongs in the Climate Action Plan, and at least some reference here is where do we think that bright line is in terms of the economics? At some point, I mean, just to illustrate the absurd point of view, this is not where this plan is, but if we had to pursue this to 10, 15, 20% of our load, I think it would pretty be obvious at that point that we've gone too far economically, and it would have been better to have focused the efforts on additional RPS resources out on the grid. So I just think it's worth thinking about where do we think that bright line is. Is it 4% approximately? That's why you've picked 4%. Is it maybe a little more than that, or is it potentially there that we reach a bright line within that 4% zone when we're actually going beyond what is economic for our collective ratepayers? So I'm with Commissioner Eglash on that point. He's sensitive to the point, and so am I, that at some point we need to explain to everybody who's not participating that this is a sensible economic program to implement. I'm going to pause to see if anybody has a comment on that, but then I just have a couple of minor points.
The 4% represents what we believe to be achievable without any additional subsidies. And so we're not, in this plan again, we're not proposing any subsidies that would require that non-participants subsidize participants for the installation. It's what will naturally, or will happen because of the economics of PV in Palo Alto.
Yes.
But the other question that I think is triggered by what you said, our last few PPAs, when we did our last RFP, as I recall, included some quite low photovoltaic utility scale systems. So I guess I do wonder if, as staff goes ahead in the next few months to flesh out everything that you've proposed tonight, is it appropriate to compare the costs to ratepayers of these systems with the cost of simply doing more utility scale photovoltaic PPAs?
Just to clarify, there is no cost to ratepayers. Are we saying there's no subsidization here? So there is no cost.
Well, that's an interesting point. We're just putting options in front of people that they can opt into or not as they wish.
If they want to donate, if they want to participate in community solar, no cost to ratepayers, and so on and so forth.
Let me just check that, Mr. Foster. if we are getting some RPS alternatives in the mix, we may not get more of these that actually do, on average, lower our bulk energy pricing, not the distribution or transmission, then perhaps there is still an economic question. If it is cheaper for us to buy kilowatt hours through RPS externally than to utilize the same sources externally and just more perhaps without subsidy provide internal distributed generation solar.
So I think I know where you're going here. I think what you're saying is in a community solar project, we, as in CPA, you would presumably buy that power at some price, or no, maybe not. No, you could offset it, right? I'm just thinking how it works. So it generates X amount of power, and that amount disappears from the person's bill. So you're saying you could buy that? I'm struggling with that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, maybe the real point then is when you come back to us in the months ahead with specific programs, can those presentations include the financial impact of what you're proposing, so that to the best of staff's ability, you can say, look, for every kilowatt hour generated locally, we're not buying that kilowatt hour, and in some way that's hard for us to do here in real time, that has some financial impact that I think is perhaps subtle, not obvious to determine.
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, but if our RPS program is allowing us to lower the average cost of power, not the cost of transmission and distribution, the power achieved into the city. I believe that this program does not. It simply just meets costs. It meets the same level of cost that we have now. Maybe not, but I think that I'll leave it there as a question, and perhaps the economic analysis would reveal whether it is or not.
I'm feeling like there's sort of an apples and oranges here, because when we talk about costs, like there are costs to buy renewable power, but they're not. But we're talking about, say, a resident, in essence. Director Fang, you want to help me out here?
Yeah, I think what you're hearing from your fellow commissioners is there's when power is generated locally, there's a bypass of the distribution system in a sense, and so then we don't get to collect distribution revenues, which is the subsidy, right? And I think that's the worry here is, how is that going to be addressed even in a community solar
And I
program?
understand that. I do think Commissioner Eglash was making that point when he was referring to the sort of subtle calculations here. But when we're talking about sort of purchasing, are we saving money, purchasing money in a big utility scale renewable energy contract from somewhere else versus a local community solar?
So we only pay for the commodity piece when we purchase, and then we still charge everybody all the distribution pieces, right? But in a community solar program, depending on how we actually design the program, there's literal bypass of the system, and that's the issue.
Okay.
In some economic analysis, I think you can look at the commodity pieces as well, and I think that it's not relevant in the scale we're talking about at the 1% range, but when you get to 4 or 5, maybe more, I think the economic analysis is worth doing. Okay.
By the way, I don't hear any of us saying that we want to burden these community solar projects with their share of these distribution costs. That strikes me as a rather extreme response to what we're talking about, and something that we don't need to do in this 1 to 4% range you're talking about.
And that would be the kiss of death to these programs.
Well, exactly. I think we should all listen to that common sense notion and intuition that these are good programs and in the community's best interest. I think what you and I are talking about is when you take this to a logical point beyond 4%.
I believe that that's the zone of interest, yes. So the other comments I have are very briefly are more to do with just with the programs that are proposed, the 3 different programs. I think there's, I don't know if that's, I'll say it for all 3. I think there's some, when you develop those programs, issues will come up about obligations of the role of the city as an owner an operator, what happens if the solar installation doesn't last as long as it is intended, replacements are needed, or perhaps the project life is less than anticipated by those who invest. I think there's just a number of issues that would have to be at least considered. Now, I think that Palo Alto residents are really committed enough to understand some of those things and will invest and participate anyway, even with some of those uncertainties. But I think someone needs to identify who owns it, what are the obligations, and what happens if. I think that's part of the plan that would belong with each one of those. Thank you.
Okay, I got a bunch of comments. First of all, I think it's an excellent report. I was very supportive of it, and appreciate all the work that, not only in the report, but all the background work that led up to it. I want to take just a moment and read a note that the UAC received from Walt Hayes. He was not able to be here tonight, but he said, Dear Commissioners, I'm writing you to urge you to approve the proposed plan as presented. Staff has worked long and hard in coming up with this plan, including seeking and receiving feedback from Community Environmental Action Partnership, which I chair on 2 occasions. Increasing evidence of climate change impacts makes setting high goals urgent, and the plan offers an aggressive program to achieve them, including a variety of approaches that allow different groups to participate. Please recommend that the Finance Committee and Council approve it expeditiously so implementation can begin as soon as possible. I agree with Walt's comments, and I do appreciate the fact that, notwithstanding our comments a moment ago, in general there is no subsidization here, no cost to other ratepayers, which I appreciate. Bruce Hodge mentioned in his remarks strong support for the community solar program. I agree with that. I do think, I like all aspects of this, but I do think that is perhaps the most interesting, innovative, exciting part of it. And I concur with his comments that if we have the ability to accelerate that one, I think that would be great. So I think that's a very exciting model. On the solar donation side, I'm a little concerned that the solar donation may bump into or conflict a little bit with the community solar. In other words, why do the donation if you can do the solar? But I'm all for trying and seeing what comes of it. Bruce raised an interesting idea of sort of combining them to some extent, where your donation would be made through the community solar program. Out of curiosity, how are you thinking that the donation program would work, in the sense of, okay, people make these donations, and then Bruce was, I think, raising the question of, would the city then build the project, or would the funds, say, go to the school district or nonprofit, and they'd be responsible for doing it? Any thoughts on that?
We've had many thoughts on it, but again, nothing on paper or nothing to propose. But I don't think under any circumstance that we're looking at would the city ever own the facility.
Okay.
So that's one, I think, for sure thing. It's just not
Okay.
what we do. But one mechanism may be kind of in continuation with Palo Alto Green, and that we collect money through the utility bill, be it $5 or $10 a month, and we collect a pot of money, and then we give it to some nonprofit based on some way that we decide how to give it to them, be it the schools or whatever, and then they build a system themselves.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And the other potential way to raise money is a Kickstarter type campaign for a particular project that's identified at a particular location.
Got it.
And so we'll be looking at both of those options and trying to figure out, or maybe a combination for that program.
Sounds good.
Hi, and I'd like to add the candidates for the donation program are ones that cannot take advantage of the 30% federal tax credit and accelerated depreciation, which combined results in about a 50% subsidy. So that's an unserved market area that this program would address.
Okay, let me spend a minute on solar hot water. I realize that's a program that has not made great progress here. I think one system installed in each of the last 2 years after some more systems in earlier years. And I understand it's really a cost effectiveness issue, although I think there is some degree of lack of understanding, and even there's multiple types of systems and it's hard to understand. I mean, I think there are people in this city who'd be interested in a solar hot water system, even if it is not necessarily that cost effective, but again, even trying to understand what's out there. So I do think the city of Palo Alto, or CPAU, taking steps to come up with some sort of group buy type thing that residents could participate in at a lower cost and lower complexity, I think is a great idea. Now, having said that, I do understand the possibility that heat pumps may ultimately be more cost effective, and although I realize that's not solar, I do think it is worth contemplating, whether through this program or something else, whether heat pumps can somehow be included in our efforts. Two last points, just small point, actually just one last point. I just want to comment that part of the program is to encourage opportunities with our emerging technologies field testing program specifically for solar technologies that come along, and I think that's worth, that was noted, I think, in attachment A, things like thermoelectric paint, PV and batteries, building integrated PV, white roofs, microgrids, and so on and so forth, and I definitely think that's an excellent idea, and we should push forward on that. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair Foster. I have just a handful of questions. One is, were heat pumps looked at, and if not, will they be looked at in the future?
I put a couple backup slides in case this question came up. This is from a presentation you received in December when we did the fuel switching analysis, and it shows the difference between basically the cost effectiveness of a bunch of different residential water heating options. And so the heat pump electric, you can see the baseline one is the gas one and how much that costs, and you can see that the heat pump electric is virtually the same cost as gas, so it's a pretty good idea to switch to that. You don't pay more. If you look at the far right, you see the worst alternative. That would be solar hot water heating. So that's the worst. And then you see a couple of them there, the fourth and fifth over, that are the heat pump with using solar PV for your electric. And then the next one, the fifth one, has hopefully a reduced cost PV system as a result of having a bulk buy program. And that looks like the cheapest alternative of all. And so we did look at that and presented it to you in December. So just as a reminder.
Great.
It is worth noting, of course, that the lowest operating cost, if I'm reading that correctly, is the solar hot water. So this goes to the point, if you guys can make some headway on that nasty-looking installation cost, it would help.
Okay, and I wanted to see if we could address Walt Hayes' one question, which is primarily about the next item, but relates to this item. I wonder if we can go ahead and talk about that now. Do you know the question that I'm referring to? So the question is, can you, we've got these extra funds. We're thinking about returning them, not to steal the next item, but
should we just hold off and deal with this item and then go to the next one?
Sure.
You're getting body language that's suggesting.
Okay, fine. Fair enough. Overruled by common sense. It seems to me that I don't fully understand the difference between program number 2 and program number 3. It seems to me that if you develop a community program, community solar program, you would naturally get sort of the benefit of the group buy. Once people are aggregated together, they're buying a bigger system, they're going to get it for less than they would if they bought it on their own. Do you see a big distinction between the two, or could they be combined in any way that makes sense?
Well, I do think that is an advantage of a community solar program. You are having a bigger system, and it is cheaper per watt. But the group buy program, for example, I mean, and it could be a good thing. It could reduce the cost a lot of the solar water heating type program. And we had this program about 30 years ago. It was very successful to have many systems put in town quickly at a much reduced, a much reduced cost. And so, I mean, it's just trying to lower the cost helps. And so you could have more, just regular, more people putting solar on the roof to make, it would make sense. It just is a lowering of the cost. And so it's a different type of lowering. It's not a scale thing, like a community solar program is more of a scale that's reducing the cost. It's more trying to get a contractor to commit to put in 100 systems, or something like that.
It's also the customers that it's targeted towards. So the community share or investment program is for those customers who don't have good solar access. They want a piece of the action. They want to feel good about owning solar somewhere in Palo Alto, whereas the group discount is going to be geared to those who have good solar access, but just want to do it cheaper.
Okay, great. I think it's great to have multiple options. I think I thought this was one of the more sort of creative and well-presented programs that we've seen. Thanks very much. I think this is really great to see. And I do want to thank Brett Anderson and Bruce Hodge for you guys being involved. I do think that hope you guys can encourage others to learn about the program and as we can help improve the program as we go through. But I really appreciate you guys being involved. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
So I will say a couple of things, and that is I would encourage staff to see if this community solar program can be accelerated. And with that caveat, on the timeline, with that caveat, I will move to approve the staff recommendation.
And so we have a second from Commissioner English. Okay, any questions or comments? Yes?
So I have a quick comment. So I suspect that this plan would move to the City Council via perhaps Finance Committee or just directly to City Council? Finance Committee. Question, would some of the comments that Commissioner Eglash and I suggested, and amongst others, be incorporated in a revision before it goes to City Council? Thank you.
Okay, any other changes, any comments? Okay, let's take a vote. All in favor? Aye. None opposed. Okay, all of us are in favor. Great, thanks very much.
Thank you. Great job.
And we'll go to item number 2.
Thank you, Chair Cook. Item 2 is staff recommendation that Utilities Advisory Commission recommend that the City Council approve refunding the accumulated net revenues from the suspended full needs portion of the Palo Alto Green program to program participants. Is that you again, Monica? That's me. Oh, and Assistant Director Jane Ratchie will be covering this item.
I don't have a presentation on this item. It's fairly straightforward. We have talked about this before, I believe, and so there are accumulated net revenues that accrued from what we call the full needs program for Palo Alto Green, the suspended part, and we've been advised by the city attorney that we need to return these funds to the program participants, and so we've identified a way that we think is a fair way to do that and identified the group of people who would get that back, and so that's what we propose to do. I know that there have been thoughts that maybe, is there any way that we could ask people, give people an option and just say, would you rather have the money back, or would you rather provide it as seed money to a solar donation program? And that sounds like a good idea. It seems fairly simple. It's very much more administratively complex. It's much easier to just pull all the records and do that back into our billing system. If we had to offer a choice, we'd have to have people individually going back in and taking those the individuals that said they didn't want to do it out, and that's just, yeah, it's a lot of customers, about 6,000, and so there's potentially many of them who would want it back. We'd have to have the default that they would get it back. So we just felt like rather than using up a bunch of the $425,000 trying to give it back, we just give it back. The only thing I can really think of to maybe encourage people, we could try to time it at the same time that we launch a donation program and suggest that maybe they want to put their money there around the same time. So we can try to do the timing that way. But other than that, I think our recommendation is we return the money to all the participants during the period that we've identified when when these funds began accumulating. And so that's our recommendation.
Commissioner Melton.
I move the staff.
Well, okay, I've got some comments. You wanted to address Walt Hayes' question a little further? Or
Well, I think that,
it's not preempted?
yeah, I mean, I got to answer it also in
Right.
Assistant Director Ratchie's presentation. Let me just see if there's a second, because we can have some comments after this. Okay, second, okay.
So wait, what's our process? So now we talk about
We can
things?
talk about
I
it.
understand, okay, got it. I don't really know what to say, other than I will, Walt Hayes did weigh in asking if we could provide a donation option. I am sympathetic to his concerns on this, and I'd love to find a way to do it. I understand the concerns being raised by staff on that, and that's about all I have to say on it.
Yeah, I share your concern and Walt Hayes' concern. That's why I brought it up in the last item, to really get that point in. But I would like, I think that I understand that the administrative burden sort of defeats the purpose. I think if we can either time it with the donation program or perhaps put in an insert when we send out the bills to explain what's going on and encourage people to donate, that's probably, I think, the best we can do in this case. It's such a tantalizing opportunity to take some of that money and kickstart what we want to do, but I'm not sure it's going to work. So, are there any other comments? Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to respond to that. What I would not like to see happen is staff spend a lot of time and money in trying to discern the desires of 6,000 customers on, we could spend the whole $450,000 trying to figure out what 6,000 people want to do.
I want to weigh in with Commissioner Melton on this. This is only $400,000. This is only $65 per customer on average. This is not a lot of money. People are used to seeing special charges on their cell phone bills for comparable amounts. This is going to be a credit. All they need is a couple sentences explaining what it is. I think we should just get on with it.
Commissioner Hall.
So do I.
Okay, any countermeasures or amendments? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor, aye? Aye. Any opposed? So, I'm sorry, but did you actually vote?
No, I voted
Okay,
yes.
okay, we're all in favor.
Under protest?
Okay, item number 3, please.
Thank you so much, Chair Cook.
Are we
okay,
really allocating 90 minutes to this?
We are, but you might pleasantly all surprise us by using significantly less time.
We'll see how we can do.
I will say that we are covering 4 key utilities in this next presentation. We're going to have presentations by both Senior Resource Planner John Ovenshine and Resource Planner Eric Keniston, talking about our electric, gas, water, and wastewater utility 5-year financial projections and associated reserves.
So may I ask if the handout at places is different from the one we got?
Right,
Yes,
I have the same question.
We found some corrections that we missed, including we used a water graph for a wastewater fund. So you should probably use the at places handout. It will be more accurate. And
Is the
probably,
new presentation online for public to see as well? The fixed up
we
presentation?
will make sure. It
Thank you.
just got done and the person who normally uploads it had already gone home, so we will make sure that is the case. Certainly hard copies are available here.
Okay, so members of the Utilities Advisory Commission, I'm Senior Resource Planner John Abenshine, and I'm our rates manager, and I'll be talking to you. We'll be running through the financial forecast for these the electric, water, gas, and wastewater utilities. Commissioner Eglash's comment makes me optimistic and hopeful that we'll be able to move through it quickly. Hopefully, there's a little controversy. Also, Eric Keniston and I have worked very closely in getting these financial forecasts together. I'll be running through the electric and gas utilities for you, and Eric will be talking you through the water and wastewater utilities. So let's just jump right into it here. Okay. So I think the one thing that I just want to note that these are preliminary projections. You're going to see the final ones in your meeting on March 26th when you see the full financial plans. But as of right now, we're projecting no rate increases in FY 2015. That's the most important, I think, part of the presentation. This shows you our preliminary rate projections over the next 5 years. As you can see, we're expecting, it shows the rate increases for each utility and also the estimated impact on the median residential bill down at the bottom. As you can see, the combined impact is estimated to result in 3 to 4% bill impacts for FY 2016 through 2019. All of these financial forecasts are presented in the context of the proposed changes to the reserve structures that you've all seen at your January 8th meeting. And that includes splitting the rate stabilization reserves, the RSRs, into 4 separate reserves for 4 different purposes, merging the emergency plant replacement and operations reserves, and also making some other changes to the electric and gas utilities, which we'll mention as we move through those utilities. You asked to make sure that we reviewed those changes with our auditor and with our administrative services department. We have done that over the last few weeks as we started to finish up our financial forecasts. They are comfortable with what we're proposing. The auditor with respect to the change in structure, and the administrative services department with respect to the level of reserves that we're projecting over the course of the next 5 years and its impact and potential impacts on our bond ratings. So let's kick it off with the electric utility. And I think probably the best way to handle this is to take questions as we go through the presentation rather than try and hold them all the way to the end. So if there's something that you need clarification on, feel free to let me know. We're not proposing any rate change in 2015. I think the key thing that I think hasn't really changed over the last several years is that we're expecting supply costs to increase over the next few years due to increases in renewables and transmission costs. One thing that's changed since last year is the forecasted supply purchase costs have actually come down from last year's forecast, and that has to do with the fact that a couple of our renewables projects, the Western Geo and Amoresco Crazy Horse projects, were canceled. These were some of our higher price contracts, and they're being replaced with lower cost solar contracts. So that brings our renewables costs down. The distribution fund is seeing roughly inflationary increases in costs. And one thing that I want to mention with respect to the distribution fund, and you're going to see this over and over through the presentation for all of the utility funds, we've changed the way that we're forecasting so that we are relying on historical actuals rather than the budget, and then basing our forecasts off the budget. And one of the reasons that we do that is that each year the budget, there's some level of the budget that isn't spent. And so we're taking that into account in our forecast now. So that is new this year. And so what that means is, if you base it off the budget, you have a bit more of a conservative forecast. We're comfortable with forecasting off of the actuals. And I would also say that it's consistent with as I understand it, the way that the city does its long-range financial forecast for its general fund as well. There are two particular reserves changes that are particular to the electric utility. The first is deleting the Central Valley Project Reserve, which is a very small reserve. You're going to have trouble seeing it on some of the charts that I'm going to show you. And the other is adding a hydro reserve. Now, one of the things that we're going to be proposing is funding the hydro stabilization reserve at $28 million. And one of the reasons that we've done that is that over the last month, as we've looked at the financial forecasts, we found that because we're pulling hydro risk out of the operations reserve, we need to have some minimum, we need to account for that risk in the hydro stabilization reserve. And so about 10 to 12 million of that funding is related to managing that adverse low hydro risk. The remainder is intended to serve two purposes. First off, it's intended to allow us to start managing normal fluctuations in hydro over the next several years. I mean, if you're at the minimums, then you're going to have some trouble doing that. The other thing that we're trying to do here is, because we are quite possibly heading into a drought period, if we do end up heading into a drought period, this will provide some level of drought protection against higher costs associated with lower hydro production. Now,
do you want to have us question as you go along?
I do. Can I mention one last thing about this? This level of funding may change with the hydro balancing proposal. It may be that we don't need this level of funding when, if, for example, we were to adopt a hydro rate adjuster. And as we do more analysis, we may find that this is, it's either not quite enough or it's too much for this reserve. But right now, what we think to start, we ought to fund it at this level. So
this applies to electric, but I think that there's similar. So forgive me for not remembering exactly the reserve structures that were discussed at the last meeting, but it appears that we're going to phase out as fast as possible the rate stabilization reserves in all of the areas, the gas, water, electric, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that there would be an operating reserve of some, which would cover things like that, so that you are not subject to having to adjust rates in fine amounts based on reasonable bands of change.
Right.
Okay, that's great. Can you also just explain, maybe it's related to that, why in most of these areas, electric, water, wastewater, and gas, there seems to be a dip in cost in 2014, 2015, and then a resumption of a trend? If you look at...
Okay, can we take it utility by utility? Because I think the reasons are going to be different. Although there is one common reason for water, gas, and wastewater, and that is, in differing amounts, each of these utilities have had to delay capital investment due to staffing limitations.
I see some of that. Okay, so maybe just do it for the electric then.
Okay. Well, let's see. Why don't we move on to that slide? So.
It looks like, specifically on the elect, that the general rate stabilization reserve, it kind of just goes away, and the reserve is primarily a hydro stabilization reserve. I'm looking at slide 9.
Well, we have an operations reserve and a hydro stabilization reserve to manage contingencies.
But I think of, when I think of the old supply rate stabilization reserve, it used to include the hydro component, and now if you look at that, it's by 6/17, it's only a hydro reserve. The part that shows as rate stabilization is gone.
Right.
And not on this slide, but the hydro, that hydro reserve, it's in a later slide, takes quite a dip. On your, when you look at it, on your 3-year drought.
In a 3-year drought scenario,
Yeah,
yes.
in your 3-year drought scenario, even the hydro reserve is getting close to being wiped out. I don't know how pessimistic we want to be. I guess my question is 28 million enough? You know, given that right now we're, you know, we all project the present
Right.
into infinity, so we're running at, we're not gonna have any hydro for 10 years.
So I think I think what you'd end up with in that situation is, well, first off, I think a 3-year drought, or the drought that I projected, is on par with anything that we've seen in the past, you know, I mean, it must be 40 or 50 years.
Going back to the 70s when we had the last.
Definitely going back to yeah, exactly. So that is, I mean, in some sense, that is the contingency that we're holding those reserves for, right?
Yeah.
And what it does is it allows us to either hold on through that drought, or if that drought does continue and we have what some people have called a mega drought, at some point we continue to raise rates to the point where our rates are recovering costs associated with the, you know, new normal, whether that's temporary or long term. And then at that point, we would likely replenish reserves to some extent, and we'd be operating under that new normal. And that's the benefit of being able to come back and review this every single year and redo these financial forecasts and react to the circumstances.
And we're not precluded from coming at mid-year.
Right, there's that too. I mean, we are not even limited to, we can come back in mid-year as well if we're seeing something that really requires an emergency rate change. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal, I guess, is what I'd say.
So your analysis that showed, that led you to the 28 million number, looks like it's primarily based on your 3-year analysis. And you say, okay, that's enough to get us through 3 years. And if it goes longer than that, then we're in unknown territory. We just have to account for it.
Well, that's true. I mean, I mean, unless you want to hold very, very high reserve, I mean, it's a matter of how, you know, what you want to plan for. I mean, unless you want to hold very, very high reserves and plan for a, you know, 1 in 200, 1 in 500 year drought. But, you know, I think rather than, I think you have a lot of tools for dealing with adverse financial situations, and reserves is only one of them. And so in a very, very long-term situation like that, you rely on your rate-making authority. You don't need to have reserves to handle all of that. So I'd say the 28 million it's not just about the drought. I mean, certainly the drought analysis did inform that, but I think looking at, you know, our short-term risk assessment combined with giving us some space to allow for normal fluctuations. I mean, if we were to start getting rainfall next winter, the 28 million also allows us to move forward with a reasonable hydro balancing proposal. I mean, it gives us the seed money that we would need to do that too. So, have I addressed, Commissioner Hall? Have I addressed your questions yet?
You did. The first question was really about the diminishing of the plan to diminish the rate stabilization. You answered that. The next question really was, and you wanted to do them one commodity at a time.
Right.
Around the dips, depending which one, 2014 or 2015.
Okay. So the 2014 and 2015, I think for the electric as a whole, I may have to get back to you on that one. My sense is that there may be, there are some factors in the supply cost for some particular factors in the supply cost for 2015. What I want to say is the fact that the renewable projects are coming online a little bit later than I think we'd forecasted last year may have something to do with that dip. But I'd have to get back to you on the specifics on that. I can cover it for water, gas, and wastewater, though. Let's see. So in the discussion on reserves, I think we've covered that pretty extensively. I mean, I just want to reiterate that the operations reserve is intended to handle contingencies in the future, where the rate stabilization reserve used to do that. Now it's going to be the operations reserve, and in the case of the electric supply, the hydro stabilization reserve. The one other thing, actually, I probably should mention here is that the electric special projects reserve, the guidelines for that require that there be a plan in place to draw those funds down, and that by 2020 they are, I'd have to go back and take a look, they either have to be spent or have to start being spent by that time. So where we are showing the electric special projects reserve staying flat all the way out, it will come down. And we do have a couple of projects that we're looking at for those funds, the second transmission line, the smart grid, so.
Actually, if memory serves me correctly, I think we had an obligation to come back by 2015 or so to you all and talk to you about what we would do to either eliminate the ESP reserves or spend it on projects, identify those projects and get approval.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide. These show the minimum and maximum guidelines for the operations reserve, and as you can see, the plan keeps keeps the supply operations reserve on target over the course of the entire plan. Now, one of the things you're going to notice with this is that the guidelines increase a little bit over time. That has to do with the fact that they're expressed, and you're going to see this for all of the utilities, that has to do with the fact that they're expressed in a number of days of operating and commodity expenses, and therefore, as those increase over time, then the minimum and maximum guidelines increase over time. And this was the same thing that used to happen with the old RSR guidelines as well, since they were based on a percentage of revenue. This shows the distribution. So this chart shows the distribution reserves. For the electric distribution fund, essentially all of the funds from the old rate stabilization reserve are transferred to the operations reserve, and that operations reserve stays fairly steady over time. Okay, let's get to that drought scenario that Commissioner Melton was referring to. We wanted to bring this to you because we anticipated you might have some questions about this, given that it's a topic on everybody's minds right now. You understand, I mean, everybody here, I think, understands how our hydro resources end up affecting our costs. Because the costs of those resources are largely, almost entirely fixed. When we get lower hydro generation, we don't have lower costs, but we do end up having to replace that energy in the market, and that means that our overall purchase costs go up. So we modeled a 3-year drought scenario, assuming 25% low hydro years for those 3 years. Now, there are increasing impacts over time to this, because in the first year or so, we're already expecting low hydro, but then we expect a return to average in our forecasts. If we model a 3-year drought, it's going to result in higher rate increases and, as Commissioner Melton noted, large reserves drawdowns. And I think this is where, in your handout, the second bullet said something about a rate increase in 2017. That's been corrected up there. So at the end of the drought, you're going to see that there's, assuming all costs proceed as forecasted and hydro production returns to normal, we would expect to decrease rates after reserves have been replenished. And this is what that scenario looks like. You can see the increasing costs from additional market power purchases, and you can see the rate increases that we have to have in response to that, and you can see the rate decrease. You can see the impact that it has on reserves here, and towards the end, so the hydro stabilization reserve, this is exactly the contingency that we're holding it for. It gets drawn down almost to zero. By the end, rates are such that if we were to enter into a new normal, we would actually be pretty much at recovering our costs at that point. So the stabilization reserve would have done its job and gotten us to that point. And you can see that if it does return to normal, once reserves have been replenished in the 2018 and 2019, or in 2018 year, we're able to lower costs or lower rates in 2019. And you can see here what this does to the operations reserve. Again, this is a contingency reserve, and we think it's appropriate to run it as low as it runs there, especially because to some extent those guidelines are being popped up because of the additional costs associated with the market power. So,
Just to add, I think a 3-year drought, I know we've debated that a few minutes ago. I just realized there was no counterpoint. I think a 3-year scenario is just fine. You've got plenty of opportunity during 2-3 years to go back and increase rates. And I agree with you, there are a 3-year drought. Many water utilities in the Bay Area are working on a 3-year drought planning scenario.
great. Are there any other questions on the electric utility? Okay.
You said you guys are still looking at a drought adjuster or hydro adjuster or whatever you want to call it.
We are.
You want to expand on that?
Well, I don't know that I'm ready to expand on it too much right now, but essentially it would be an automatic adjustment to rates that would happen in response to certain conditions. And so it might add, say, a half cent or something like that to the rates, and that would be ideally a separate line on the bill. Again, you got to check the feasibility of that. And yeah, it's similar to gas in the sense that it's an automatic adjustment that's based on some sort of criteria, but it would happen once a year as opposed to monthly, if needed. Do you want to say anything more on that?
Well, I was only going to add that if we did do something like that, we'd return with changes to this hydro reserve. Then we would be able to make that a smaller reserve target.
John, offline, you may want to look at what East Bay Mud's done in that regard for the operation of its Freeport project. There's a surcharge that was set into rates as an opportunity, just in the way you described. So it met all the notifications under Prop 218, et cetera, and when the board adopted our 2-year road program, that's embedded in it as an opportunity under some circumstances to boost rates up to 14% on the water.
Okay. Did you say this was the was it Freeport?
Freeport project.
Freeport project. Thank you.
So if you look at our rate schedules,
Okay.
available online, you'll find it.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you design that one?
Are there any last questions on the electric utility? Okay. Moving on to gas. Gas is a very sedate compared to the electric utility. We are mainly expecting inflationary rate increases through FY 2019. The only, as far as changes from last year's non-commodity, now remember there is the distinction between the commodity and the non-commodity, and I'm going to talk mainly about the non-commodity. The major change from last year's forecast has to do with some additional funding we're putting into the forecast for continuing the cross-border inspection program. And these are sort of some preliminary numbers that are based on some discussions with our engineering group. The formal proposal isn't in, and it may change, but we've chosen to include it because that's the slightly more conservative forecast, and we thought that was the way to go in this case. Let's see. Here you can see the projected rate increases, and this is always, since we changed to a floating commodity rate, we've had a lot of trouble figuring out how to show this chart. What we've settled on here is we've assumed constant gas market costs through the entire forecast period. So you're going to see that blue bar up there on the top. Doesn't really change at all. And so what you're seeing here is the impact that are just the costs we can control, the distribution rate increases. You're seeing the impact that those have on the overall customer gas bill. And those are, again, inflationary in the 2 to 4 or 3 to 4% range.
Why is operations extraordinarily high in 2015?
Yep, and I think that this is, actually we're getting to Commissioner Hall's question. Thank you for stopping me here. So it's actually that Yeah, that's where the cross-board program is. That's where the cross-board program's added in, and you can see we have the decreased CIP spending in that year. And that's why operations is high. Commissioner Hall, going to your question on the dip in 2014, you can see that has to do with the CIP decrease.
I see that.
Okay.
So CIP is low in 2014 for reasons that we've discussed previously, that there's a shortage of labor, of skilled labor to do that work. You're nodding your head yes. But I take it from your comment that we're holding CIP lower in 2015 because we want to somehow compensate for the higher operations cost associated with the cross-board program?
No, it's actually a fortunate coincidence, actually, that in the previous forecast, we didn't have the additional operations cost. We're including the additional operations cost this year, but the lower CIP spending.
So we're increasing CIP spending as rapidly as we think staffing permits, but we think it's not going to get back to normal levels until 2016. And then it actually looks like it's a bit higher in 2016, presumably to partly compensate for lower spending in the preceding years.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on it in part, and also one of the things that is also factoring in gas is that there were a number of gas CIP programs that were combined into a single one to complete the installation. I think it was to complete the retirement of all the it was ABS material pipe remaining in Palo Alto. So they're finishing up that project, and so that's part of the reason there's a longer overhang for gas as opposed to water and wastewater.
We combined a couple of gas main replacement projects into one, which is a big lump in 2013 that you're seeing. So there's a bit of carryover from that. Even though it was in the budget, we still have work ongoing.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on that slide? Okay. I wanted to at least give you some indication of where commodity prices were going. So this shows you where we were expecting they were going to go when you saw the last forecast. And you're also seeing here where the market is expecting things to go as of January. The red dotted line is the most recent forecast that I have for you. And if you kind of iron out or neglect the seasonal changes that you're seeing in there, essentially it looks like the market's kind of expecting gas commodity prices to stay fairly flat over the next few years. Again, that changes rapidly. This shows the reserves projection for the gas utility. And just to remind everyone, the supply and distribution reserves are being combined. In this case, most of the RSR goes into the operations reserve, and a little bit remains and is drawn down over over the forecast period. And the plan keeps the operations reserve in line with the target. Are there any questions on the gas utility?
I guess I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss the forest for the trees on that market price forecast slide. Isn't the primary observation that gas prices are at historically low levels and they're expected to remain at historically low levels for years to come?
But volatile.
What?
But volatile.
Well, I don't see any volatility in this. I mean, if you take a look, these are changing by plus or minus 5%, and that includes the seasonality. So actually, I see prices that are showing very little volatility. Please.
So I think you're probably right on the insight that you're talking about there. Prices have risen. I mean, they've over the last few years they've stayed fairly low, but they've gone up, they've gone down. I think the volatility where you see volatility is when you compare from forecast to forecast to forecast to forecast to forecast. I mean, if I were to show you 5 forecasts over the last year, you'd see volatility, you'd see swings in expectations for the future. But we haven't seen anything that's projecting that they're going to for example, take the trajectory that they did in the 2005 to 2008 timeframe. Would you agree with that? Okay.
How high did they get right before the recession hit?
$14.
15.
And then it went to 2, and now it's up to 4.5, 5.
Thanks.
Okay, so if there are no more questions on gas, I'm going to turn it over to Eric for water and wastewater.
Good evening, Commissioners. The wastewater collection fund is another one where it's relatively sedate. The treatment costs are projected to go up about 4 to 5% annually, and all the other costs, operational costs, are going up by about inflation, 2 to 3%. There's, similar to the other forecasts, we've started looking at previous actuals and using those as a forecast basis, so some of our projections for where rate increases are going have come down. Last year at this time, we were saying that we would possibly need a 9% increase this year, where again, we're saying now it's 0, and looking at a future rate trajectory of roughly 6% increases, a much smoother glide path. Yes.
The CIP on this shows the usual drop this year and then going back to sort of the same level it was before this year. Nevertheless, it looks like that's well, maybe not 5 million a year, 4 million a year, something like that, if you just measure the yellow bar there. And I guess, refresh my memory on what the waste, I know what's going on at the treatment plant, but that's up in the purple section. The yellow section is our collection system, and we're spending 4 million a year on refurbishing the collection system?
Yes, we are.
Basically?
Roughly about, yes, about 3.5 million on main replacement, essentially, and another miscellaneous lateral replacements, I believe, from there on, just small bits, but yes, the majority of it is main replacement projects. So
Are storm drains part of that, or are they separate?
storm drains are separate.
So we're anticipating a rate increases previously we were anticipating a rate increase of wastewater in 2015, but now we're not. And I see the CIP was down in 2014 and increase in 2015. Is it really, are we just really capturing the lowest spending plan on CIP, which allowed us to push out using the reserves a rate increase? Is that really what happened, or was there some other cost parameter that decreased that allowed us to not increase rates in 2015 in your projections?
Next slide.
Oh,
Yes. So. We ended up with a lot of reserves left. If you look at it, how the new reallocation of what is left over for rate stabilization in the new breakout for 2015, what we're proposing, compared to what we need for operations, we have quite a bit that is just based on current analysis yes.
that explains it. Thank you.
And so the plan with this, similar as the others, is to use a slow glide path and take that rate stabilization reserve down over the 5-year period. And you can see operational reserve levels remain roughly right on target levels. So, any questions with regards to wastewater? Moving on to water. Water, as you can guess, is got a bit more entertainment going on in it in today's world. again, we're seeing that we are blessed with enough excess reserves this time around coming into 2015 that we do not need a rate increase going into this current year, or in this new fiscal year. So that is very happy circumstance for us. In addition, we are looking at having wholesale water increase costs in the future years, but this year's 2014's wholesale water purchase cost from SFPUC came in lower than what we originally projected, so that's adding to the savings that we're seeing in this year. We are projecting in this year and in next year's a 10% reduction due to the voluntary cutbacks. Going out into future years, we'll see what happens. I believe in April, we'll get the final pronouncement from SFPUC as to what they're going to do. And depending on something we're thinking about for the future is a potential of pass-through. It is allowed under the government code that we can, with a 30-day noticing, pass through costs from our supplier. And that way we don't have to go through the whole Prop 218 noticing segment if all we're doing is adjusting the wholesale water component and pushing that through. We'd have to go through a Prop 218 noticing on the first round to inform everybody and break out the rates as such, but after that we could potentially move it through for a period of up to 5 years, I believe. So.
There's been some discussion that SFPUC changing from a volumetric to a more fixed rate kind of a thing. Any further word on it, any further speculation or word from them on changing the way they bill their wholesale customers?
No, well, I haven't heard anything about that. I don't think that is being pursued at all anymore right now, but I'm always on the lookout for it. Are we
examining any structural changes in the way we bill water to our customers?
It's always, we just did a cost of service study and an allocation, if things change, then we will also update those cost of service studies and move forward and see what happens going forward. And right now we are, if in the case of potential drought, we've already started reaching out to our cost of service study consultants and are seeing what avenues we can pursue on that end. So
a real quickie, probably easy for you. The little dip that we see in the revenues for 2014 to 2015, is that because you're anticipating that customers will actually do what you ask? Okay.
We're hoping, yes. So yes, as you see right here, the dip in revenues in 2015, and we're looking at 4% increases there on out. And this again is assuming that only 10% voluntary increases for right now. If situations change and we need to have mandatory cutbacks or there are larger price increases from SFPUC, then some of these circumstances will change. But for right now, this is the path we're on until we hear otherwise. So. And speaking of SFPUC wholesale rate forecasts, you can see how the difference from last year to this year, their wholesale prices have come down in their projections, mainly because the water sales were higher than they were forecasting last year, so we're seeing some of the benefit of that.
Yeah, the 7-year.
Oh. Yes, I should. Why would we go for 7 years in the water? It's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel approach. If you see out there in 2021, hopefully that will be when SFPUC rates start leveling off after all of the infrastructure. So yes, someday we're looking at after that it'll just be inflationary issues, but that is sort of the light at the end of the tunnel is what we're trying to show. So, we hope. Going on to reserve projections, you can see one of the reasons why we're suggesting a zero rate increase. We have a large surplus in the rate stabilization reserve for this year. A confluence of events. We had the monies that we needed to spend for the reservoir project came in much lower than expected. We had CIP returns as well. So we're sitting in a position right now where we do not need to do a rate increase. And that should kind of be hard to justify, I think, if you increase it now and go forward and build that up even further. And again, operation reserve levels stay right about at target. And of course, the impact of the extended drought. Right now, we are at a stage 1 drought response under the Urban Water Management Plan. And meaning right now we're just under voluntary restrictions. We do not have to implement drought rate schedules. That said, if in the future we have to go that way, we have reached out to our consultants and we are seeing what potentials are out there for us with both our current prices and under different circumstances as they arise, different pricing regimes as are passed on to us. But if sales do decrease, we may have to, the portion that goes to our fixed costs obviously will, on all of our operations distribution costs, if we start collecting less on that, rates will have to increase to collect for that. So,
Will you remind me of the definitions of stages 2, 3, and 4?
Well, two is when we start getting into the 20% mandatory, and it starts and essentially you're talking greater and greater percentage cuts in 3 and 4, and correspondingly more stringent enforcement measures that we take.
But I guess, so stage 2 is with a 20% restriction.
Right.
What are 3 and 4?
I couldn't getting into the 30 to 50. 30
Yeah,
to 50.
stage 1 is 5 to 10, stage 2 is 10 to 20, then I think it's 20 to 35, and then it's greater than 35. And so at some point you get into some sort of very different water rate structure. And then and there's different restrictions on use and enforcement of, no irrigation potentially if you get up to stage 4, things like that.
I just didn't remember what those percentages were because, if we're already at 10, it could go worse in a year or less.
Did we ever get to stage 3 or 4 levels in the previous drought?
In the previous drought, it was a 20% cutback. In the 1987 to 92, they asked for 20%. But in 1991, they were poised to ask for a 35 or 40% cutback. And then the Miracle March happened. Yeah. And so at that point, it was really bad. And we were having to cut back a lot. We were looking at, what are we going to do at that point? And then we got out of it, but that could happen again. We'll be going through a more in-depth review of the water supply situation and the different components of the water shortage contingency plan at the council study session on March 3rd. And so that might be an opportunity to hear a little bit more about what the plans that are already in place in the form of the Urban Water Management Plan that was adopted by council in 2011. And also you'll get a little bit updated picture of the water supply situation. By then we'll have end of February numbers by early March that we can show what the water supply situation is. And we have data back to during that last drought that shows it was way worse than where we are now. The thing that's changed from the last drought, and I think this is probably true for all agencies, is, as Commissioner Hall said, since that last drought, San Francisco manages the system. They've reoperated their system and they manage it with the expectation that the next 3 years will be a drought. So they hold water, they, conserve water and storage a lot longer than they did before the 1988, the start of that drought in 1987, 88. At that time, they were still producing electricity that at this point in the last couple of years, they have not. And so they have much more in storage at this time than they did in 1987. So they now have a water first program of how they manage their water supplies. So we're in much better shape than we were at that, but it could get dramatically worse.
On finishing up, for drought rate schedules, we would recover costs through higher rates and send price signals on accordingly. As you can see, the rates, the ideal structure, and at least to start, would be that rates would rise, but that customers who cut back usage wouldn't see any dramatic increase in their bills. Actually, the Urban Water Management Plan has a set of principles, criteria to evaluate water rates. In the case of a shortage, it's in Appendix G. Any drought rate schedules that we would bring forth would come back through you, and we would notice them accordingly. But they have to be acceptable to the community. They have to try and minimize impacts as much as possible and be workable. So we're not going to come up with something that's beyond the scope and capacity of either staff or the billing system or anything like that. So, and various methodologies are always possible. So, any questions?
Okay, so that's what we have for you tonight. And we're planning to take a presentation substantially similar to this to the Finance Committee at their March 4th meeting. We'll also be talking to them about the proposed reserve structure. And then we'll return with the actual financial plans with the formal rate and financial forecast proposals at your March 26th meeting, and then at the Finance Committee's April 15th meeting. You'll have a chance to review the budget in May as usual, and then in June we're going to take those financial plans and we're going to take them to the council along with the budget for formal adoption. So, I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm trying to get you all out the door here, but I forgot to acknowledge the contributions and the help from Commissioners Melton and Waldfogel in reviewing these reserve structures and asking asking good questions that helped us hone our proposal, which I think made it fairly easy to get through tonight. So, thank you to both of those commissioners.
Can I just ask one question about the May-June timeframe? Since I think in all of the areas, all the utilities, we're not proposing any rate increases, at least that's the vision is today. Unless there had to be a drought issue the way you described, the reason you don't have a rate proposal on the calendar is because there's no increase, right? Prop 218 does not require us to notify customers of a zero rate increase.
Right.
We only if there's a change.
Exactly. And the situation we might run into if, for example, on April 15th, a 20% mandatory, we get a 20% mandatory declaration from the SOPUC, we may need to then start that whole Prop 218 process and come and talk to you folks about drought rate schedules, and we would probably target October or so, and that would be okay. I mean, I think we have the reserves to be able to manage a few months if we need to do a later rate increase.
Okay, it's been a great discussion. Thanks very much.
Nice job.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, very thoughtful.
Before these guys leave, can I ask sort of an offline question? Leading up to the May budget meeting, do you plan to require the services of the subcommittee sometime in April?
I would expect we would, but I'll defer to
I'd imagine imagine so. We'll, if, we'd be very grateful, if you're volunteering, we're very grateful, and we can, I do think we will want to work with the budget subcommittee to help us through that process as well.
The sooner you can sort of plan that out and, save the date, kind of a input to us would be useful.
Thank you.
Good, okay, so that does it for item number 3. Item number 4, any items for future discussion?
Yep.
Commissioner Foster?
So, couple of things. Jeff raised the comment earlier of fiber to the premises. I do note that on our long-term schedule, we do have municipal Wi-Fi as to be scheduled, not yet scheduled. But how about the issue of fiber to the premises? Director Fong, where is the city at this point on fiber to the premises? This is an issue that's sort of fallen off the UAC's radar because it was sort of this special subcommittee. Is this something that should come back?
Yeah, I do think that there are some studies that have been commissioned by, if I'm not mistaken, either the subcommittee when it was still constituted or the council, which the IT department is now heading up with help from Jim Fleming from utilities. So they're presumably we're kind of on hold until the study gets completed.
When do you expect the study to be completed, ballpark?
Actually, I don't know.
Okay, so I would suggest that we have an information item or discussion, maybe I should call it a discussion item, to just get the UAC back up to speed on where things are with FTTP in the months ahead when it seems appropriate. It could be before that is finished, it could be after. That's my proposal.
Okay, well, it would definitely be after, and in the meantime, we have issued other reports that have been commissioned, certainly within the utilities area, on looking at fiber to the premise and resulting in at least a staff recommendation to do Wi-Fi. So there is that information as background information if anyone wants it.
Have we received that? Yes. I mean, like a while ago. I mean, has there been anything in the last 6 months?
No, over the
Okay.
past year was really
Right.
handled by the.
I remember I'm with you.
Emerging or technology and connected city.
Okay, would anyone object if we added FTTP as a discussion item when it seems appropriate in the months ahead? Just to be up to speed on it? Okay. Just gave you a lot of latitude on timing there, Director Fong.
Except, it really is going to, I mean, if I'm right, the CTO is running this show, is that correct? And so.
Yeah, but when the study's done, we can ask him to bring it to you.
Yeah.
We can certainly request that.
Fiber is within our jurisdiction here, right?
Yes,
Right, so.
But
It
asking Director Fong to bring it to us, she's not running it. So
Well-
we gotta ask the CTO to bring it to us.
It's okay, I can work with him.
Maybe Director Fong will.
When you say it's under your purview, it's true, although the council can decline to
Of
seek your
course,
advice and
of
just go
course.
straight forward, which is kind of where they were moving forward, although they did have a couple of UAC commissioners on that committee, as I recall.
Yeah, my sense from discussion with a number of city council members is there was sort of, and I think Mayor Scharf at the time was sort of a desire to kind of change things around a little bit and a desire to move things forward. And so we all sort of stepped back over here, but I think it would be good to get back involved. And then the subject of PV partners ending was raised earlier. Is that something we should be discussing? Or does it just happen? Any thoughts on that? Well, I think I saw that it ends at the end of this year, or is expected 15. Oh, I thought 14 is what I saw. Okay. I fully, well, when
End of 2014.
yeah.
Oh, it does, okay, so it is coming up.
And not based on any specific sunset clause, I believe, but based on fully subscribed, right?
Running out of money.
And running out of money. So does that just happen and that's that, or should there be a Utilities Advisory Commission discussion with staff on that as to whether there's a recommendation that continue, not continue, or in other words, would we ever make a recommendation to the city council that we just let it be, or that we extend it, or should we take no action?
Well, what I heard from Jane was that staff felt that the community solar that was proposed tonight was a better path forward. And so I guess in response to your question, should we examine partners? I guess I wonder if it's been answered or if it should somehow be examined in the context of community solar.
I'm inclined to think that letting it go and going to community solar is the right way to go. And I guess the question is, do we opine with the city council on that? Director Fong, you think the city council is interested in this, or you think they're just fine letting it go off into the sunset?
I think as long as it comes up in the context we just heard it in, which is in the program, as long as it's explained that that's happening, I think that's a good point.
So you're saying, in other words, no need for us to separately, formally say to the city council, we've looked at this and we say fine. Okay? Okay. That's it for me.
Thank you very much. And any commissioner comments? Okay, next scheduled meeting is March 26th. And when is the meeting after that? Is it April 2nd or?
April 6th? Yeah, April 2nd. Is it whatever the first Wednesday is? By
My fault.
design,
My fault, yeah.
No, it's
No, I think I asked for it.
Well, by design only because we were worried that there could be so much on the March agenda that it would bleed over into April, and we thought we'd have everything ready for the March agenda anyway, so if we could just meet at the regular April time, we would sort of just take care of it all very quickly.
I'll take credit for that. So my fault.
Yeah, we didn't. No, actually, not much. But we did move it to accommodate certain schedules to March 12th, and then we realized that we need a little bit more time to turn all the stuff that you heard today around a bit more thoroughly, and so we moved it to the end of March as a result of that. So it really wasn't your fault, because the end of March worked a lot better for us anyway to allow staff adequate time.
Okay, so it is April 2nd is the first Wednesday. Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.